Hey folks, let me ask you something. Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong somewhere? Maybe someone looked at you like you weren't good enough, like you didn't deserve to be where you were. Well, today, I have a story about a woman who thought she had all the power, until she made one fatal mistake. She thought she could bully someone out of a place they rightfully belonged to. She thought she was untouchable. Oh, but she was so wrong. Because the woman she tried to humiliate, she was married to the man who owns the hotel. Stay with me till the end, because trust me, you won't believe what happens next. And hey, if you enjoy these kinds of stories, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Now, let's get into it. The Grand Solace Hotel was the kind of place where power was everything. The chandeliers sparkled with quiet arrogance, the marble floors whispered wealth, and the staff? They moved with the kind of confidence that only came from knowing they worked at one of the most exclusive hotels in the city. And no one embodied that arrogance more than Vivian Harper. Vivian wasn't just any hotel manager. She was the hotel manager, the gatekeeper, the person who decided who got the best treatment and who was just another guest passing through. And she loved that power, which is why, when Margaret Ellison walked through those glass doors, Vivian's eyes narrowed. Margaret was elegant, graceful, but in Vivian's mind, she didn't fit the VIP mold. Her pearl-button coat was neat, her silver hair was pinned up with practiced care, and her sharp blue eyes scanned the lobby like she had seen it all before. But to Vivian, she was just another old woman who probably couldn't afford to be here. Vivian smirked as she watched Margaret approach the front desk. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Grand Solace." Margaret nodded and handed over her reservation confirmation, her fingers steady. Vivian barely glanced at the paper before tilting her head, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Oh, I think you might be in the wrong place. This hotel has very specific clientele." The lobby, once a symphony of quiet murmurs and distant footsteps, went still. Margaret met her gaze, unfazed. "My name is Margaret Ellison. My reservation should be under that name." Vivian gave a dramatic sigh and typed into the computer like she was humoring her. But the moment the reservation popped up, her smirk twitched. There it was, a fully paid VIP suite. Vivian's nails tapped against the desk as she forced a polite smile. "Well, I suppose everything is in order. Lucky you." Margaret's lips curled. "Oh, I don't believe in luck, dear, just good manners." Vivian's jaw clenched, but she handed over the key. For now. Margaret had barely settled into her suite when a sharp knock rattled the door. She sighed, setting down her book. "Come in." Vivian strode in like she owned the place. No smile, no pleasantries, just crossed arms and a look that said, "I'm in charge here." "There's been a mistake," Vivian announced. Margaret arched an eyebrow. "Oh?" Vivian's lips twisted into a fake apology. "It seems this suite was actually reserved for a VIP client. We need you to vacate it immediately." Margaret exhaled slowly. She had seen this before. People who used their little power to make others feel small. But Margaret wasn't small. She adjusted her sleeves and folded her hands in her lap. "And what kind of guest am I exactly?" Vivian hesitated, just for a second, before her voice dripped with false kindness. "Oh, certain guests prefer a more luxurious experience." There it was, the unspoken insult. Margaret's expression didn't change. "I see." Vivian took a step forward, clearly expecting Margaret to gather her things and walk out like a good little guest. But Margaret just tilted her head slightly and said, "You might want to answer your phone when it rings." Vivian frowned. "Excuse me." And then, right on cue, the front desk phone started ringing. The receptionist, who had been watching the exchange nervously, answered. Within seconds, her face drained of color. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." She held out the phone to Vivian. "It's for you." Vivian rolled her eyes but snatched the receiver. "This is Vivian Harper, front desk manager. How can I—" She froze, because on the other end of the line was Edward Ellison, the owner of the Grand Solace hotel chain, and his voice was cold. "Miss Harper, would you like to explain why you've been harassing my wife?" Vivian's face went completely white. She turned slowly, looking at Margaret like she was seeing her for the first time. And in that moment she knew she had made a terrible mistake. "Oh, but we're just getting started. Want to know what happens next? Trust me, you do." because this story is about to take a turn you won't see coming. So stick around for part 2, and if you're loving this so far, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me, what would you do if you were Margaret? See you in the next one. Previously on the Grand Solace incident, Vivian Harper, the front desk manager at the Grand Solace Hotel, thought she could bully an elderly woman out of a VIP suite until she found out she had messed with the wrong person. Because Margaret Ellison wasn't just any guest, she was the wife of Edward Ellison, the owner of the entire hotel chain. And when Vivian picked up the phone and heard his cold voice say, "Would you like to explain why you've been harassing my wife?" That's when she knew she was doomed. 6:16 to 9:21. The hotel goes silent. The hotel lobby was buzzing with energy, but Vivian couldn't hear a thing. Not the soft chatter of the guests, not the clicking of expensive heels on marble floors, not even her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. All she could hear was that one sentence looping in her mind. "Would you like to explain why you've been harassing my wife?" Her mouth was dry, her palms damp. She tried to swallow her panic, but the way Margaret watched her with that same calm expression made her stomach turn. She had been so sure this woman didn't belong. She'd been so confident in her authority, and now, she was seconds away from losing everything. She forced a laugh, a brittle, nervous thing, and cleared her throat. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding," she said, keeping her voice professional. "I was simply enforcing our policies." Silence. Vivian's breath caught. Edward's voice was low, controlled, but deadly. And then he spoke to someone else in the room. "Richard, where are you?" A pause, then a voice from the speaker. "Just outside the hotel, sir. Do you need me to handle this?" Vivian felt her entire body lock up. Richard Hale, the regional director, the man in charge of hiring and firing. Vivian gripped the edge of the desk, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. "No need," Edward continued, his tone unreadable. "I'll deal with her myself." Click. The call ended, and in that suffocating silence, Vivian realized two things. Edward Ellison was coming. She was going to lose everything. 11:52 to 18:36. The moment of truth. Minutes felt like hours. Vivian stood frozen at the front desk, barely able to breathe. Margaret? She simply sat down in the VIP lounge, poured herself a cup of tea, and waited. No gloating, no anger, no words. Just quiet confidence. And that made Vivian feel even worse. Then, the doors of the Grand Solace swung open, and in walked Edward Ellison. The energy in the hotel shifted instantly. Guests whispered, employees straightened their backs. The doorman practically tripped over himself trying to hold the door open. Because this wasn't just a hotel owner. Edward Ellison was a force, tall, well-dressed, exuding the kind of power that didn't need to be announced. His eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on Vivian, she felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. She quickly stepped forward, forcing a smile. "Mr. Ellison, Not a word." Vivian's mouth snapped shut. Edward didn't even spare her another glance. Instead, he walked straight to Margaret, his expression softening instantly. "Darling," he said, his voice full of warmth, "are you all right?" Margaret smiled. "Oh, quite. Just a minor inconvenience." Vivian felt like she was about to be sick. Margaret wasn't even angry. She wasn't shouting, demanding justice, or making a scene. She was calm, unbothered, and that made it so much worse. Edward turned, his eyes finally locking onto Vivian, and when he spoke, his voice was ice. "Vivian Harper, you have exactly 5 seconds to explain yourself." Vivian opened her mouth, then closed it. Because what could she even say? That she assumed Margaret didn't belong? That she tried to remove a VIP guest out of pure arrogance? There was no explanation that would save her, so she tried the only thing left, an apology. "Mr. Ellison, I deeply regret—" "No, you don't," he cut her off. "You regret getting caught." Vivian flinched, and then he gave the final blow. "Richard," Edward said, turning to the entrance, "she's yours now." And from the doorway, Richard Hale stepped inside. Vivian's legs went weak, because she knew exactly what that meant. 23:03:32:30, the final judgment. Richard Hale was a man of efficiency. He didn't waste time, didn't entertain nonsense. And right now, his full attention was on Vivian. Miss Harper, he began, flipping through a folder. Do you understand what just happened? Vivian nodded quickly. Yes, sir, and I promise this will never— It already happened, Richard interrupted, and it will never happen again, because you are no longer an employee of the Grand Solace. Vivian's heart stopped. Wait, no. You are hereby terminated, Richard continued, unfazed. Your employment record will reflect a conduct violation, and you will not be eligible for rehire within the company or its affiliates. Vivian felt her world shatter. She stared at him, then at Edward, then at Margaret. This is a mistake, she whispered. I've worked here for years. Margaret tilted her head. And how many other guests have you treated this way? Vivian's throat went dry. She wanted to beg. She wanted to argue. She wanted to fight. But deep down, she knew there was nothing she could say. Security arrived moments later. And in front of every guest, every employee, every person in the lobby, Vivian Harper was escorted out of the Grand Solace. Her heels clicked against the marble one last time. But this time, they didn't sound like power. They sounded like defeat. To be continued. Oh, but we're not done yet, because while Vivian's career just ended, her real nightmare is only beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. So if you're loving this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, do you think she got what she deserved? Vivian Harper, the arrogant hotel manager, thought she could get away with mistreating an elderly guest. But that guest, she was Margaret Ellison, the wife of Edward Ellison, owner of the Grand Solace hotel chain. Vivian's world collapsed in an instant. She was publicly humiliated, fired on the spot. And now, as security escorts her out of the hotel, she realizes something terrifying. She didn't just lose a job, she lost everything. The lobby was silent as Vivian Harper walked toward the exit. No more arrogant clicks of her heels, no more air of superiority. Now, she was just another person being escorted out. Eyes followed her. Some guests whispered, others pulled out their phones, ready to capture the fall of the once powerful hotel manager. And right before she reached the exit, she made one last mistake. She turned around, her gaze locked onto Margaret. And for the first time, her voice broke. Please, Vivian whispered, Mrs. Ellison, Margaret didn't even blink. She simply said, Have a good evening, Miss Harper. The doors slid open, and just like that, Vivian Harper was gone. Vivian stood outside the Grand Solace, frozen. The cold night air bit at her skin. She clutched her bag, the only thing she had left. For years, this hotel had been her empire. She had walked through these doors with confidence, with purpose, with power. Now she was just another person on the street. She took a shaky breath and pulled out her phone. There had to be a way to fix this. She scrolled through her contacts, fingers trembling, before she found the name she was looking for. Martin Reynolds, Vice President of Operations, a man she had worked alongside for years. If anyone could pull some strings, it was him. She hit call. The phone rang once, twice, then voicemail. This is Martin, leave a message. Vivian swallowed. She tried again, straight to voicemail. She tried another name, a different contact, then another, then another. Each call ended the same way. Ignored, because now she was nobody. She lowered her phone, staring at the screen. Her hands clenched into fists. This couldn't be happening. She had spent years building her career, years proving herself, and now it was gone in a single night. Her breath came in short gasps as reality crashed down around her. No severance, no recommendations, no second chances. Because Edward Ellison had made sure she would never work in this industry again. She turned, staring at the hotel she once ruled over. For a split second, she thought about marching back inside, begging, pleading, but she knew it was useless. She had burned every bridge, and now there was nothing left. Her phone buzzed in her hand. For a moment, her heart leapt. Someone was calling her back, a lifeline. She quickly answered. Hello? A pause, then a familiar but uncertain voice. Vivian. Her blood ran cold, because in that single word, that hesitation, she knew. This wasn't a call offering help. This was a call from someone who had already heard what happened. And they weren't calling to support her. They were calling to distance themselves. Vivian opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because for the first time in her life, she had no words left. So let me ask you, do you think Vivian got what she deserved? Because this isn't just a story about losing a job. This is a story about losing yourself, about thinking you're untouchable until reality reminds you otherwise. Vivian Harper built her career on power, on control, but in the end, she learned the hard way that power doesn't come from making people feel small. It comes from respect. And respect, that's something she never had. So what do you think? Would you have given Vivian a second chance? Or did she get exactly what was coming to her? Let me know in the comments below. Vivian Harper, the once powerful hotel manager, lost everything in a single night. She was publicly humiliated. She was fired on the spot. She was banned from the entire hotel industry. And now, standing outside the Grand Solace Hotel, she realizes there's no coming back from this. But the worst part? She's about to learn that when you build your life on power and control and then lose it all, you're left with nothing. The cold air wrapped around her like a punishment. Vivian Harper stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at her phone screen. No calls back, no messages, no help. She had tried everyone, co-workers, executives, people she once called friends, and every single one of them ignored her. Because in this industry, powerful people only respect power. And now, Vivian had none. A gust of wind blew past, and for the first time in years, she shivered. She turned, looking back at the Grand Solace Hotel, the place she ruled over for years. She had walked in and out of that building hundreds of times, always with confidence, always with purpose, always with power. Now, she wasn't even allowed inside. Her hands clenched around her phone. She couldn't accept this. She wouldn't. She opened her contacts one last time. There had to be someone who would help her, someone who still respected her, someone who hadn't turned their back on her. Her finger hovered over one name, a name she hadn't called in years, her sister, her only family. Someone who, despite all of Vivian's arrogance and ambition, had always picked up when she needed her. Vivian took a shaky breath and hit call. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times, then a click. Her heart leapt. Then a pause. A long, heavy silence. Then a voice. Vivian? The hesitation in that single word hit her harder than anything else. Because in that hesitation, she heard everything. The doubt, the uncertainty, the realization that her own sister wasn't sure she wanted to be involved. Vivian's breath caught. Her throat burned. For the first time all night, she felt something deeper than anger. She felt fear. Because this wasn't just about losing a job. This was about losing everything. Her status, her respect, her identity. She had nothing left. Nothing but a long, empty night ahead of her. She opened her mouth. She wanted to say something, anything. But no words came, because what could she even say? The line stayed silent. Then, a quiet, soft sigh from the other end. And finally, a click. The call disconnected. Vivian stood there, unmoving. The city around her kept going. People passed by, lost in their own lives. Cabs pulled up, doors opened and closed. The world didn't stop for her. She had spent years controlling people, deciding who belonged and who didn't. And now she was just another nobody on the street. No one cared, no one looked. For the first time in her life, Vivian Harper was invisible. Her phone screen dimmed to black. Her reflection stared back at her. And she realized something truly terrifying. She didn't just lose her job, she lost herself. So tell me, did she deserve it? Did she get what was coming to her? Because power, it doesn't last forever. And when you build your life on making others feel small, don't be surprised when one day you're the one left with nothing. Let me know in the comments what you think. And if you love stories like this, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay tuned, because there's plenty more where this came from. See you in the next one.